History celebrates the battlefields whereon we meet our deaths, but scorns to speak of the plowed fields whereby we thrive. It knows the names of kings' bastards, but cannot tell us the origin of wheat. This is the way of human folly. Jean-Henri Fabre, 1823 to 1915. Nevertheless, as a result of the painstaking work of scientists and historians, we are slowly able to get a better picture about the origin and history of the potato. Dr. Jejong, who, to the best of my knowledge, is not dead yet. Solanum tuberosum. Potato. The starchy stable. Boil 'em, mash 'em, put 'em in a stew. The simple spud has been with us for thousands of years, always ready to be the anchor member of a nutritional team, culinarily flexible, resilient, hardy, stubborn, and almost stoic as a plant. It's found its way completely across the globe. It's able to stretch out needed calories and minerals from soils that other staples would fail in. It's literally the third most important crop with regards to human consumption, only behind rice and wheat in its production and use. It's so enmeshed in our agriculture, history, and diet that you could argue if an alien species came by and observed us as third parties, you could classify us as grain and potato eaters. Yet it's always had a bit of a PR problem, been called the bread of the poor with both good and bad connotations. Superstitions and cultural beliefs have caused people to look down on it as consumption. It's fit for the commoner, but not for the king. It's not clean food. It's shown up in our art time and again, but often with works that focus on the rustic and the salt of the earth themes. So let's talk about the potato. I think it's more interesting than you realize, and I'm pretty certain if you stick around, you're going to learn some things that will surprise you. Well, with anything, starting at the beginning is as good a place as any. Let's take a short trip back 10,000 years into the past and head to the Andean mountain region near Peru and Bolivia. For our Animaniac aficionados, we're close to Lake Titicaca. This region of the world left a huge mark on civilization when it comes to the day-to-day agriculture we do now. Do you like eating? Do you like potatoes, beans, maize, or corn for my fellow Americans? Amaranth? No, not that. Grain. Land races are common here for many crops. Hunter-gathering is all the rage, but we're starting to try this new stuff called domestication. And of the crops historians find at human sites, hunted or gathered, potatoes are key among them. Now, while absolutely gorgeous in views, the area isn't necessarily known for being flat, regular in rainfall, mild in temp, or for having easy to till soil. When domestication begins to take hold, we start seeing evidence of potatoes coming into the forefront of the region's agriculture about 8,000 years ago. Potato is a good candidate for domestication because, you see, it can grow in poorer soils, it is resistant to certain pests and predation in the area, tolerates stretches of dry weather, and doesn't care about cold or high altitudes. It has lots of nutrients and vitamins as well, so you can squeeze sustenance out of harder to work soil. It also has one teeny tiny drawback. It will kind of kill you. Note, this isn't the Idaho spud yet, so keep that in mind. You see, potatoes produce a class of secondary metabolites known as glycoalkaloids. Now, these chemicals give potatoes several advantages in their native niche. Plants produce glycoalkaloids to better tolerate certain environmental conditions like cold. They can use them as predation deterrent. Note, we are predators. Glycoalkaloids should deter us. In the case of the potato, these particular alkaloids do a severe number on the lining of your lower intestine and can do worse elsewhere in you. So how did the people figure out how to deal with this? To explain it, I have to talk about three things, okay? Breeding, clay, and freeze drying. Trust me, this is how we built an empire of carbs. The main differences between early potato and current potato result from breeding, and those differences have been a long time coming with a lot of skilled work. In organisms, we have variations in genetics leading to variations in traits. Not everyone is in the NBA, not every potato was high in glycoalkaloids. We can take advantage of that and select for or against traits in a crop. Guess which potatoes got selected for over time for us to keep eating? Yeah, the ones with less glycoalkaloids. But while that was a work in progress, how did they keep eating them until secondary metabolites were significantly low? Here's where the other two things come in. The first bit involves consuming a specific clay with the bitter potatoes. This clay has compounds that bind with the glycoalkaloids, making them incapable of being absorbed, so they pass through. Bitterness toned down, nutrients are a go, and you pass the toxic secondary metabolites as waste. People still use this method in the region with certain dishes involving certain potatoes. The second is literally the invention of freeze drying as a processing method. Up in the high elevations, temperatures can get so low as to freeze the potatoes that are harvested once they are left out. These potatoes were then thawed and pressed during the day, rinsed, dried, and then frozen again. This is repeated until you get chuño, a preserved potato product that is shelf-stable and pleasantly free of those nasty acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. Those three strategies got potatoes on the menu. And with potato added as calories and a valuable trade commodity, the populations in the area were able to develop, grow, and become more complex. Centralization of governments, taxation systems, art, science, and religion were all impacted by the inclusion of this crop. The added calories and stability allowed for specializations, since not everyone had to be focused solely on food production. You can see the impact of potato on culture evidenced in language, in art, and in religion from the archaeological record. It is argued that without this staple, life in the upper regions of the mountainous terrain would not have been practical, let alone able to build trade networks and/or empires that stretched for both thousands of kilometers and hundreds of years. For instance, through the 500s-ish to the 1500s-ish, the Nazca, the Moche, the Chimu, and the Inca all had complex societies in which potatoes played key roles in their agriculture, art, and economy. Their industries were powered by mussels, and their mussels were powered by potatoes. But that's in the Americas. How did it get to Europe? There's an ocean in the way. Well, that brings us to the elephant in the room. How did the potato get to Europe? The Spanish conquistadors. So if you weren't aware, during the age of exploration, the Spanish came over to the Americas looking for gold, silver, and to toss literal boatloads of platinum into rivers and oceans as valueless adulterants only useful to counterfeit silver. Oopsie! After committing crimes against humanity by doing the historical equivalent of mugging another civilization, the conquistadors had a whole bunch of sources of shiny metal and a bunch of free labor, in air quotes. While Spanish invaders tried to force the locals to adopt European agricultural practices and European crops, in actuality, potato calories still fueled their mass plunder of silver and gold back to the New World. This transfer of plunder instigated a little thing historians referred to as the Price Revolution, a series of events that caused great upheaval and systemic change in Europe. While doing so, they also brought the potato to the Canary Islands. This is where the Spud's inevitable march across the old world began. Initially, the potato spread through botanical gardens and monasteries. But you have to know that the Spanish kept as much information about the New World, its crops, its cultures, etc., as secret as possible, as long as possible. Information was viewed as valuable, as anything could give Spain's rivals a leg up. For context, reports written in the 1500s on potato crops didn't surface again until the 1800s. To add to the confusion, when information was distributed, it was often inaccurate. It was a game of historic telephone where the writers weren't there in the first place. The English herbalist Gerard in the 1590s misattributed information about it, and as he was one of the preeminent botanists of his time, his mistakes were taken at face value. Carolus Clusius found out about the crop from the markets of Italy and not the botanical gardens he worked in, and as he was regarded as that guy, one of the foremost botanical experts of his age by many of his contemporaries, he was still surprised that the Italian peasantry was already relying on it for themselves and their livestock. Confusion was exacerbated by botanical beliefs at the time as well. Several more mystically inclined interpretations of plants and their health effects on people were used as guides and treated as gospel. These systems labeled the plant as either poisonous, related to diseases like leprosy, the cause of insane lecherousness, or cursed because it wasn't in the Bible. And while 8,000 years ago the average tuber was bitter and had to be processed or consumed with clay, these varieties were perfectly fine. Which is a good thing, because when hungry enough, the peasant class was willing to turn a blind eye to all of that if it meant getting to another season. There was a disconnect between the nobility and the monastic botanical scholars and the field workers in this sense. The crop was more readily adopted by marginalized groups, like for instance Protestants in Catholic areas, who were then more than willing to take their expertise with this foods to literally greener pastures when push came to stab, balkanizing and siloing the knowledge further. Because of this, the potato developed a stigma among some groups, while being valued by others. Certain Italian demographics The Polish, the German, the Dutch, and the Irish incorporated the potato in their diet before, say, for instance, the Catholic French or the land-holding British. A stark example of this divide of pre-potato, post-potato mindset and its real-world consequences was a portion of the 7 Years' War referred to as Kartoffelkrieg, or Potato War. As a side note, I was unaware of this entire thing, and I feel cheated of Kartoffelkrieger knowledge by the US education system at this point. I have voiced my displeasure with my brother, who is a historian and a linguist. This little portion of the worldwide tiff was between Prussia and France, and the Prussians referred to it as the Potato War because the Prussians had potato crops, which couldn't be easily trampled, burned, or looted by French forces, while the French did not. That is why I brought up that bit earlier, in which some demographics that had fled kept their expertise and shared it in more welcoming regions. In this case, that little mistake strategically bit the French in the behind. Remember, armies march on their stomachs. The calories became a strategic strength or liability, depending on whose side you were on. This was noted by captured French officers, and some who saw the writing on the walls decided to start pushing against the long-held stereotypes and myths about potato eating, using such things as preciously guarding potato crops and speaking of their value until the public was interested. And then on certain nights that were clear, it just seemed that these veteran guards weren't at their posts right when the now curious French peasants could get in and access the spud. Oh no, you robbed me. Suddenly the cat being out of the bag, as it were. Another stumbling block was logistics. You have to understand, before the industrialization of fertilizer production, there were severe bottlenecks with ag output. Crops are nitrophiles, as in nitrogen-loving, so you can exhaust your fields and leave them barren if you keep slamming them crop after crop. In response, Europe used a crop rotation system, switching between crops and allowing for 1/3 of the fields to lay fallow in a repeating pattern. This way, the degradation would be slowed and some of the methods of replenishment could make up for nutrient loss. Here's the stickler. When you're adding crops to a crop rotation, where do you put them? Which part of the cycle? Do you grow them in parallel or do you replace? This test is a pass-fail type scenario. The good news being that if you get it right, you know. The bad news being that if you get it wrong, you can't swing by Aldi's to make up for it. Hence the reluctance to change. You can grant yourself wiggle room if you can replenish the leached nutrients to the soil more quickly. Jobs such as night soil collectors, guess what that refers to, and an industry of free-range liquid ammonia fertilizer collection were two ways to source bioavailable nitrogen. It works. Concurrently with this, there was also a shift in livestock production and handling methods. For the early part of the adoption of these new crops from the New World, livestock was allowed to roam. When they began to be housed in a central location, i.e. barns, the collection and application of post-processed nitrogen sources allowed for further nitrogen replenishment in an easier manner until the industrialized chemical fertilizer reactions were teased out. These changes gave room for the potato to be worked into the rotation. Alright, you've gotten the information out. The peasants are finally down with it. You've worked it into your crop rotation, and you have varieties that are not bitter. So what happened when finally most of Europe had gotten onto the spud train? From 1750 to 1850, the population almost doubled. Pathogens like ergot don't target potatoes like they do rye and wheat, so ergoline-alkaline poisonings became less endemic in the population. While most people think of the Salem witch trials when they hear ergot, it's a fungus that has stalked us through cereals for quite some time. In cooler, wet periods, it can cause illness, crippling injury, and death throughout the population. Potatoes are more tolerant of cold versus many grain varieties. Remember, its origin was high in the mountains. So in regions with colder climes or in periods with cold snaps, having this diversified addition to the crop acted as a buffer versus famine. Full people get sick less, so there were less plagues. Also, as industrialization began to pick up, you had more sources of readily available calories and nutrients that can be cheaply produced. Why is this important? Well, workers need to eat. Fed workers are more productive. More production leads to expansion. Expansion leads to friction. Frictions lead to changes, empire building, etc. You see an explosion of change happening around this time and a great deal of population movement. Potatoes fed the poor that were doing the moving about more often than not. Things weren't all roses and moonbeams, however. There were drawbacks as well. If the plebs could live off potatoes, you could have the landholders get the richer food. This dichotomy is starkly displayed in the Irish conditions leading up to the potato famine. I can go into the blight, which is the what, but the logistics behind the how were very simple. Ireland has a long history in agriculture. It's a beautiful region with a climate ideal for many crops. It also has a complex history with the rest of the British Isles and especially the British aristocracy. Ireland at this time was under rather tight control by the nobility. They controlled what the Irish could grow and who could buy what. The British land owners exported beef and other goods out for their own use, while the Irish land workers had to do with what they had. In this political situation, they did what they could, and what they could do was rely on the potato. It's how it ended up being so core to the common folk and has so many different culinary uses. While producing a wide variety of crops, in practice, the working class were subsisting on a monocrop, while the rich had a varied diet. So when the blight struck that crop, boom, Irish diaspora. And suddenly, Boston and New York develop Irish accents. This is just one example of how the potato gets intertwined with politics, history, and class. One of many. We have to keep in mind when we look at foods that are culturally associated. What are the things that contributed to this item becoming connected to a people? Who was contributing what? How do these links in food and culture get passed on in art, literature, and food traditions? Just some food for thought. As I've said before, context is king. So we've had evolutionary biology, plant defense compounds, history, and geography. Now on to nutrition and human metabolic pathways. Let's get to the brass tacks of the nutrition of your average spud. To clarify, there are multiple varieties of varying sizes, secondary metabolite profiles, and more, so this is your average Idaho spud that we're talking about here. If you steam/bake a potato, you're looking at about 75% water, 20-ish% complex and simple carbohydrates, 2.5% protein, 2.2% fiber with the peel, and about 1-ish% fat. You're also looking at vitamins B6 and C, so much vitamin C, by the way, that it was used as well as limes to prevent scurvy on long voyages. I personally have an alternate history hypothesis that if the Brits had gotten a hold of the potatoes before the Spanish, we might have been calling the Brits spuds instead of limeys. I fail to see any flaws in this. The protein profile that it has, while not high in quantity in comparison to meat, is still a complete amino acid source. That is to say, it's a complete protein, so for those who can't get protein from, say, animal sources, this helps to hit those macros. And that is the average ANSI standard version. If you get any of the varieties that are deep yellow, bright orange, richly red, or darkly purple, you're going to be getting carotenoids or anthocyanins. Potatoes of those colors have several of those classes of compounds which are antioxidants. So the final bit of nutrition we need to bring up is something called the satiety index. What is a satiety index? To put it in simpler terms, it's how filling a food is. The higher the satiety, the less you need to eat for those full signals in your digestive and energy regulation systems to trigger. In comparison to grains and rice, an equal serving of potato makes you feel fuller, so you eat less. When you take that into context, the plant's botanical traits and the economics, you can see where this became the bread of the poor. Positive nutritional profiles, protein sources that you don't have to butcher, vitamins, filling, environmentally tolerant to poorer conditions, and ease of propagation all contribute to this. So why the modern day unhealthy wrap then? This isn't a simple matter, but however some key factors can be laid out. Time constraints, the rise of delivery food, quick convenient snacks, and especially, in this case, frying everything, has done a number on the general population. The same gen pop that typically gets the blame in reports versus an economy that doesn't allow the public to slow down, rest, get regular checkups, and prepare a well-balanced dietary regimen. If you're eating too much fried, too much fast, too much salted, whatever, then yeah, it's unhealthy. It doesn't matter the vitamin or fiber content. Although, eat more fiber for the love of God, preferably from vegetables. The areas where potato consumption is the easiest to increase are those fast options. How much work does it take to get French fries versus a baked potato? How good is that baked potato going to taste if you add chives, butter, sour cream, bacon, and sharp cheddar? So it's not the tuber, it's the delivery. And the delivery itself isn't the demon in question, it's the amount of said delivery. However, that sounds dangerously like nuance. And nuance doesn't sell. Quick fixes do, especially if they are sold by people with perfectly sculpted jawlines and hard abs standing shirtless in a grocery store filming TikToks.
This look pretty good, man. Where your clothes at?
And that's the modern interpretation of the idea potato bad, blank good. As before, you have influential people saying things with trust me bro as their source. Meanwhile, the average Joe is just trying to get through the day. Instead of it being a well-to-do Frenchman or an influential landed British lord, it's Hot Pants McGee with poppin' biceps. History doesn't repeat, but it sometimes rhymes. Eat yourself some potatoes, maybe with a side of beans, or in a stew. It's okay, season your food. Carbs aren't poison. Just because something is affordable doesn't mean it's worse for you than the more expensive option. Don't let people who wear underwear in public and scream at their phones make you feel bad about your dietary protocols. I would like to let you know that I am currently fully dressed and not in a grocery store while recording this. FYI. They probably have a personal chef and a Dr. Feelgood anyways. And that is my potato video. The potato is cool. You shouldn't feel bad about eating it. It's got a lot of history behind it. I hope you learned some things. I hope you can do deep dives on your own with some of the sources I linked. I hope you now remember the Katatha and refer to the war by its proper name, as I will. If you stuck around this long, shoot me a like and maybe a subscribe. I'm going to keep making these things, and hopefully, as I get better, I'll get faster. Next is either oats or soybeans. I don't know. They're both good.